somehow we always seem to pick out the ones with the nuts, or at least I do. But I do like to know what I'm going to get, and that's why we're here today. I think that with metrics, we can predict what we're going to get. So I'm going to start off today with a little bit of background, probably 10 minutes or so, talking about Agile and some frameworks and a paradigm called goal question metric, which I think are really important things to understand, because we want to know how do we come up with these top 10 metrics, right? So a lot of those top 10 are based on some principles that we're going to talk about first, and then we'll get down to the top 10. First off, I'd like to, Sabrina, we'd like to have a poll. And we're going to try to ask you guys, you know, how you measure whether or not you're improving or not. And let's see what we get here. We got a lot of people starting to respond and say customer feedback. Gut feel seems to be a good one so far. And I would say that it looks like gut feel is going to be the winner here. Most of the people, the votes are coming in, and I think that's probably why we're all here today, is that you know, it turns out that a lot of times we, especially with Agile, you know, we think that, oh, you know, we don't need to measure anything, we don't need to have any documentation, and a lot of us tend to go by gut feel in terms of how we measure our progress. And so I think we're pretty much finished here on the votes. We got about 60% on gut feel, and that's kind of what I expected on this. So I think that, you know, before we go on, there's some things that we can agree on. I'm sure there's a lot of things that we disagree on. Fixing defects early, you know, we don't want defects in production. We want to utilize our resources effectively, of course. Is there anything that you think you could add here, Doug? Oh, by the way, you know, I've been working with Doug for many years on tools in various environments. So, Doug, maybe you could share with us. Is there anything else that you think should be added on here as a real general principle that we could use going forward?
Well, you know, over the years I've done a lot of consulting, and a lot of them have been financial businesses like credit card companies, and especially this time of year with Christmas coming on, I would say that very last one is probably the most important one. So you definitely want your credit card to be authorized when you go to buy that new a gift for Christmas. So I would think that's probably the most important one that I would think of.
Okay. All right. Good. And so I think that as far as metrics go, I think there's also some good general principles that we can all agree about, and that is that we want metrics to be easy to get and easy to capture, right? The last thing we want is to, you know, put forth a lot of effort and then end up quitting because it's so hard to get the metrics. And then, of course, we want them to be valuable and actionable, something that we can use towards improvement, not just for the sake of collecting numbers. So, and alluded to earlier was that a lot of times we think that maybe we don't need metrics. And that, you know, tracking velocity is enough, but I think that velocity, as you'll see later on, is really kind of a resulting metric, and that if we take care of a lot of other things, we'll get velocity. And so I think that we should really focus on what I call a source metrics, things that could lead to velocity or not lead to velocity. So one more poll here. We're going to do another poll on do you regularly collect and use? So let's see how we get here. We got, shoot. We just messed up here. I guess I'm not a very good polling person. Sabrina, you're going to have to do this polling here for me because I'm not very good at it.
No problem.
Um, okay, so let's move on to frameworks. And one of the things, framework is kind of a big word, but really it's just a way to think about and organize our thoughts. So, and one of the frameworks that's dear to my heart is something called GQM framework, goal question metric. And I started using GQM when I was very small, and my father would tell me to move a pile of logs or to split some logs or to do this or do that, and I'd say, well, why? And so I'd ask a couple questions and he'd answer them, and finally he'd say, just do what I tell you to do. And so I've always been asking questions, and I've never stopped after asking questions, but I have my dad to thank for GQM. And the point is that you really have to think about where you're going and what your goals are, and then what we can do from those goals is ask questions that, if they were answered, would help us to determine if those goals were met. And then based on that, we need to think about those questions. And so just a little bit about GQM. We start off, I think a lot of us do a lot of measurements, or maybe we don't, but we do have measurements, and a lot of times we kind of get mixed up as to why we're collecting reports being sent around in emails, and you may wonder, why isn't anybody looking at my reports? Well, it's because they're not really collected to or simulated or connected to any goals. And of course, goals are also associated, and hopefully we can get some economies of scale and be able to collect metrics that satisfy and answer questions from more than one stakeholder. And so we do a lot of stakeholder workshops and so forth, and working with companies on being able to help them, crystallize their goals and come up with some real metrics that will determine what maybe wanting to reduce the cost of development. He may ask, which areas of his development process have the highest rework rates. So what you can do is you can take your goals, and of course you want to look at the metrics that are related to rework rates in order to reduce our overall cost of development. Here's just an example of putting that into a table form, where I've got categories of goals along with questions and metrics that could be used to answer those goals. And a couple extra columns there. One of them is, and I know that some of the tools that you have used in collecting this kind of information. Hey, Doug?
Yeah, I'm here. Mm-hmm.
Did you hear me? I was
No,
wondering
I didn't. What was your question again?
My question was, can you tell us any of the tools that you use to collect information for metrics?
Yeah, well, this is really interesting what you're showing, a spreadsheet, of course. I mean, that's sort of over the years, that's what everybody has tended to do, but sort of the trend these days is to use a more automated tool. So if you're using something like Jira, for example, you can certainly put in custom fields into Jira to record more of this information, and eventually you might export it out to Excel anyway to do graphing and charting or whatever. So that's what I would recommend is to try to get away from that manual approach and to try to leverage your tools as much as possible to generate some of these metrics, some of the resulting values.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I think so too. A lot of our, the last thing you want to do is be doing everything with spreadsheets. So, when I think about Agile, I think about, the goals of Agile. I don't think the goals are really any different than the big goals are any different than, waterfall or any other methodologies. But so I want to just get back to what Agile is all about and think about goals that could be related just to Agile. And so I'm just going to take a couple excerpts from the Agile Manifesto to think about as we go forward in collecting our metrics that are important for it. So first of all, I think this is an overall theme in Agile, is working software, right? We want to have working software. We want to satisfy the customer. We want to show them early the software. And the reason for that is because we want to get feedback from the customer. And throughout, these are just direct quotes out of the Agile Manifesto, and you can see that it really stresses working software. It stresses so that we can get feedback. And then again, here's another working software. They just keep talking about working software, right? So another important principle is sustainable development and a constant pace indefinitely. So that's going to go forward in our metrics as well. The other one that I think that's important is attention to technical excellence and good design, and this is related to a common concept now that's called technical debt. So I think in order to think about Agile, we also have to understand where we came from, and you can see this is an illustration of waterfall where everything was done one step at a time. You can see here's a spiral development method where this really prevented us from trying to do everything at the last minute, but you can also see that testing at the end. And then finally we came up with something called prototyping, and so different than Agile in terms of we did show prototypes and we did show something to the customer to see if they liked it or not, but the only problem was that a lot of times the prototypes that we built were not something that would be ended up as the final product.
Or they were just wasted effort. You'd create a prototype and then you'd have to throw it away and almost start all over again.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Dialing with try another connection here with my telephone. I'll be right back in just 2 seconds.
Okay. Can everybody hear me now? Can you hear me now? Okay.
Hey, welcome back. But better.
Just,
You were breaking
let
up
me
a little
keep
bit before.
let me keep going here. So, and finally we have the agile development method, and you can see a couple different things that I've circled here that are important that we talked about earlier in the manifesto, and that is involving the customer, collaborating and working together, and again working software. Here is another one, another model, and you can see again the stress on the working software. Next poll. Here we're trying to find out how you guys end up actually um, get some of your metrics, where you get them from. Looks like, and it's kind of what I thought, in that a lot of metrics are gotten at the end, right, in production, the defect metrics in production. And um, of course, the trend is to, shift to the left, move to the left, and try to get numbers that are early, right, so that we can prevent things rather than waiting till the end. I think we're just about done here with the vote. We got 63% of you said that it was defects in production. So that's a real interesting one, and that's kind of what we thought. So what are the goals of Agile? We have speed, quality, we got satisfying the end user. Those are probably the key goals of Agile. And when I think about these key goals, what I like to do is align them with the actual Agile Manifesto. And you can think of the characteristics from the manifesto and align them with the goals, and just kind of do a check and see if you are actually meeting your goals in using Agile. And then what I like to do is I like to think about buckets of goals and sub-objectives for that. So for speed, maybe we would want to reduce technical debt, because if we have too much technical debt, then we can't respond quickly to requirements and changes. And on the other side, perhaps that we have owner participation in our daily stand-ups, as well as making sure that we get the requirements correct and having working product. So, based on these goals, what we can do is we can break them down and actually come up with questions to see if we're meeting these goals. Related to speed, I may say, well, related to speed, I definitely need to understand the requirements well in order to get good speed. I definitely have to be on schedule. I definitely want to reduce my rework and keep track of that if I'm going to have good speed. Um, when you think about, for instance, quality, maybe from the end user point of view, do I have defects less than before? Are my end users finding defects? Um, do I have debt piling up? Do I mess things up when I fix things? Those are kind of questions that, if answered, would tell me if I'm meeting my quality goals. And so now we're going to get down to the countdown. Are you ready, Doug?
Ready, but I was thinking about that last slide, all those questions. That's really great. How would you recommend, like in an enterprise, sort of drilling into those and getting those nailed down? Any thoughts about that?
Well, that's a good question. I think that a lot of times when we work with clients, sometimes to start off with, their goals might be nebulous. So we have to work with them on getting their goals really specified. And then, I actually have I guess you could say, a database of questions. And so based on goals, I have a kind of like a little cheat sheet in my back pocket that has questions that are related to those goals.
Yeah, and I'm sure you see the same questions coming up. Questions or the same metrics coming up over and over again, like defect quality and those kinds of things.
Right. So whenever I enter into a metrics type kind of a program with folks, with our clients, I work with them starting off with their goals and go kind of using a top-down approach to help them think about the questions and so forth. And once I present a couple questions, then that gets them started, and they come up with a lot of them on their own. But you're right, a lot of them tend to be the same.
All right, great, thanks.
Okay. So here we are. Are you ready, Doug?
I'm ready.
Okay. Here we go. So the number 10, we're counting down. Number 10 is velocity. And
what? Velocity is last? I thought that was the only one.
Velocity is last. Some people think it's the only one, but I think it's the last one. Not that it's not important; it's still in the top 10. And I put this picture of Carl Lewis here because he's all about velocity, right? And but the thing about his speed, and we saw his results in terms of his records, but we didn't know what he ate. We didn't know his training program. We didn't know the weight of his shoes. We didn't know how hydrated his body was. And all of those things go into what happens in velocity. So, we want to answer these questions. Am I on schedule? Did I estimate well? And let's talk about velocity. So velocity tells us whether or not we're doing the stories that we said we were going to do. And here's And I think that, velocity itself is just a number. So we may have 21 stories, right? And the thing about velocity is we want to look at it over time. And so here's, just an example of variance, right? So maybe the variance from one sprint to the next. And I think, most of the times we want to look at anomalies in data. And maybe Doug, you can expand on why these kinds of things might happen. Have you seen,
What in the
why would
world? What did
velocity?
you do?
Yeah, I mean, why would velocity go
Wow.
down or up in any particular
Yeah,
sprint?
yeah.
Do you
Well,
have
one
any?
nice thing is if you have tools, right? If you have Jira version
Mhm.
1, whatever, and it's easy to track this because I mean, without that, it's really hard to see that, what when you're doing good, when you're not doing so good, right? You might have some
Mhm.
perception. But this is, using the tool itself, like a burn down chart, can really show you really well.
Mhm.
Maybe you introduced a new feature, or maybe you have your
Mhm.
technical debt is building up and you're not taking care
Right.
of that like you should. Yeah.
Right. Well, this here's an example of the burn down chart, and like you said, you want to take a look at those examples of anomalies in a constant slope. Say, okay, so where was it that, what was I doing when things were flatter? What was I doing when I happened to be burning down a lot of things faster? And just by examining these charts and looking at data, you can kind of get an inside view of what's going on. Um, so now we're going on. So velocity was number 10. Number 9 is defect removal effectiveness, and this is highly promoted by our friend Capers Jones. Um, and defects really answers questions about quality. Did my end users find defects? Are there less defects than before? Am I improving? And here's just to think about a little bit, in terms of a definition. It's really the defects that are found in a certain time period. It's important to define the time period um, post-release versus the total defects. In any defect, I think what's important here is any defect found by the user influences quality. So it's not only P1 defects, because if you have 10 priority 4 defects that you think, oh, that's not important, that's cosmetic, it's not really, a big deal. But, as a user, you know that if you come up with a lot of things that just don't quite look right, you think the quality is bad, right? So I think it's important to think about that as well. And here's some information from Capers Jones where he talks about the relationship between CMM capability levels and the amount of defect removal effectiveness. And it turns out that also that and you may want to think about, do you get a C or do you get an A, right? This reminds me of school. It's a standard bell curve, right, where you're thinking about, I certainly don't want to get a C. I'd like to be more towards the A in finding the defects before they get into production.
Well, that's interesting because that curve, of course, represents your bell curve, like more people getting a C within a class, right?
Mhm.
But it
Mhm.
also
Right.
represents the cost of a defect. If you're not doing so good at finding those defects early, that bell curve perfectly represents at the C level, you're paying more money to fix these defects because you only find them once they're in production.
That's true.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Um, the next one that we have here is what we call added work. And added work would answer questions like, am I on schedule? Am I overcommitting? Can I sustain my work pace? Am I going to burn out? Um, so really, it's about not overcommitting and being able to keep on going. And the metric is the new stories added over the original stories that we had planned. And we all know how this works, right, Doug? That the product owner comes in and says, oh, can you do this too? And you might say, well, we have to take out this other one. And they say, no, that's important too, right?
Yeah, I call that scope management. And again, a
Uh-huh.
lot of the tools now, they easily show you, like in your burn down chart, when you're adding scope, additional work
Mhm.
after the sprint has started. So that's a really
Mhm.
important thing to keep track of.
Right, and I like to look at things over time, and so If I see that that difference tends to keep getting bigger and bigger, then that's definitely an alarm for me. Um, so the number 7 is what I call work category allocation. And so what we want to look at here is, am I allocating my resources optimally? Are they doing the right things, right? So, and maybe, do I have trouble understanding requirements? Because, requirements tends to be a big bucket of time that we tend to spend allocate our time on. And some other categories could be, I may be spending time on testing, new feature development, hopefully, because that's all about working software, right? Maybe I have to do a lot of research to figure something out. So there's a lot of things that could go in here. Can you think of any other categories there, Doug, that you might that you've seen?
Yeah, I added support.
Support.
I mean, some enterprises, they might have that team not only doing the new development and fixing the defects for the next release, but they might also be supporting their customers. So that could be a big
Right, right.
So I
So
mean,
here's
this diagram is key, right? To
mhm.
understand where it is they're spending their time.
Right, right. And I think that it's easy to see here that, gee, these guys are spending a lot of time in fixing things. Um, requirements, it looks like it's taking quite a bit of time as well. And I'd rather put that into new feature development if I were looking at this from this organization's point of view.
Mhm.
Um, right? So are we spending enough time showing our stakeholders what we've done, we have to show working software. That's one of our main goals, certainly not fixing things. So it's definitely one of the things to look at. The number 6 metric is what I call work sustainability. And this is kind of an interesting one. And basically, I'm thinking to myself, am I estimating well, and can I attain quality in a sustainable manner? And basically, it's related to overtime. I think it's not rocket science to think that when I put in overtime, I make mistakes, um, and that happens in every industry, I would say. And so here's a chart of unplanned overtime over sprints, and one of the things that you want to look at is what causes these aberrations in data. Um, what do you think would cause something like that, Doug?
Yeah, that sort of looks like a new feature that we put in that we
Uh
promised a customer, and it was a little rushed, and maybe we didn't do enough design or testing
huh.
when it went out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's because we got a requirement that we didn't quite understand, so at the last minute we're trying to figure out what this is, and then we're trying to hurry and rush before the end
Another
for
thing
the
this could be
demonstration.
is a new feature came up, and the
Hmm.
customer really wants it, but
Hmm.
it couldn't fit all in one sprint, and we just sort of shoved it in. Instead of splitting it up appropriately across
Oh.
sprints, we just shoved it into one
Hmm.
sprint.
Right. So we didn't break it down enough
Yeah,
into
yeah.
separate
Not
tasks.
quite enough
That's a
planning
good
up
one.
front.
Uh-huh. That's a good one. Yeah. The thing. Here's a relating overtime and defects, and it's not rocket science again. That when you have more unplanned overtime, you have a direct correlation to defects. The next one, number 5, is defect rework rate, and so the kind of questions that this answers is, am I wasting time? Is my technical debt accumulating? Am I getting worse and worse? And let's take a look at this metric here. Basically, this is the time that I spend fixing stuff versus divided by my total effort. And the basic concept, and I think it's just common sense that we just can't get faster if we're fixing things and fixing mistakes that we keep making. Um, and you'll see that you know this is the defect rework rate, but there's some information missing here. We need to really combine this with something else. And that something else is really, a lot of times we may be spending a lot of time on fixing defects or not spending a lot of time fixing defects, but that is also related to how many are reported and how many we decide to fix based on that. So you can see that, for instance, in this instance, um, we removed them all, right? Whereas here, we didn't remove a lot, and there were a lot left unfixed. So we can't just look at the blue chart because, or the blue bars, because you can see that technical debt is accumulating, basically, if we don't continue to fix these things. And I think especially as later sprints go on, I'm sure you've seen it, we just tend to sweep these things under the rug. I'm sure you've seen that before, Doug.
Yeah, yeah. It's like finally, eventually it gets to the point where you've just got to stop. You got to stop and do a sprint where you fix those major bugs.
Well, that's a good point.
Sacrifice those new features, right? Yeah.
Right. I mean, sometimes you actually have to have sprints where you actually plan just to have, half of it for fixing things. That's just the way it ends up, especially towards the end. Number 4 is total unexpected work, and this kind of helps us to answer questions like, am I biting off too much? What kind of things are throwing me off schedule? Why am I delivering late, or why do I have to put in a lot of overtime? And so, there's many reasons for that. Maybe some user stories are incomplete. Maybe I didn't. There were some problems that I didn't foresee in terms of researching, trying to figure out how to solve a technical problem or an algorithm or something like that. Or maybe it's just too hard. I mean, a lot of times we simplify things as engineers. We think that, oh yeah, I can do that, but then you get down into it and you get into the nitty gritty, and then you say, shoot, I can't figure that out, right? So basically, this is the total work done minus the planned work, or the unplanned work, divided by the planned work. And you can see here, here's an instance where we have planned and unplanned, and you can see that the planned and unplanned ratio there is not too good, whereas maybe we're doing a little better here. Have you seen these kinds of things, Doug, in your experience?
Actually, if you back up to the previous slide, if I saw something like this and I would see a lot of problems with unexpected work, one thing I would consider, I mean, the metrics show you what's going on, but then how do you solve the problem? It's, one of the problems that I've seen is a lack of training. Maybe the product owners don't necessarily know how to write good stories, how to manage those stories, how to trace those stories down into a delivery model. And also from the developer's perspective too, they might not feel like they have the opportunity to stand up and say, I don't understand this.
Right.
Maybe some team dynamics there.
Okay. Looks like we have a couple questions here. Boy, a lot of questions here. Question on total unexpected work. What does technical debt include? Okay. One person, Jean Ann, says that remember, you don't pay employees full overtime. That's true. We don't pay overtime, but we can still record it because basically overtime is, in a way, overtime is really technical debt. Here's that one that we just showed a minute ago. As far as the technical debt question, we are going to get to that in a minute. And here's, the things that we can categorize kind of things that we are doing that are unplanned, and you can see here that, maybe we need to think about, why are we spending so much unplanned time on requirements, and really maybe we need to pound on our product management people or our product owners and say, hey, you need to write these things a little clearer, or give me some pictures or something so I can understand it better. Other tends to be a big category, and a lot of times we just kind of throw things into a bucket that we don't quite understand, and sometimes if that gets too big, then we need to really dig into it. Number 3, here we are, defects in production. average fix time. So the thing is that if you do end up getting a defect in production, and it takes a long time to fix, the first thing is that customers aren't happy, right? And the second question that you have to ask yourself is, why is it taking me so long to fix these things? And so, basically, you take the time to fix the defects, the priority one defects, or however you want to um, define this metric, divided by the total defects, and you get time per defect. And so, for instance, here's one where we show, of course, we don't want to make customers wait, but you can see that we're improving, so that's good. I didn't want to show all bad things, so we have to show something good, that we're improving. That the average time to fix a priority one defect is going down. On the left there is number of hours. So number 2, here we are, defect categorization allocation. And this is kind of what you alluded to earlier, Doug, in terms of the cost of a defect being very high when it's found in production, related to the DRE. And so, things that we need to think about is, why are things breaking and how can I get faster, right? Because speed is one of the things of Agile, and breaking alludes to technical debt and rework. So we want to really take a good look at our defect rates per category. And so we generally put these into a few buckets. You can have more buckets in terms of categories, but defects that come injected because of requirements, maybe bad logic in the coding, maybe configuration errors in the environment, or defects in testing. And defects in testing could be things like a defect that is not written correctly, that the developers don't understand, maybe no screenshots, maybe not a description of the environment that the defect was found in. Those are actually defects in testing. And so in this
So Phil, are
particular
these
instance,
the phases that you found the defect in? For example, you found 38% of your defects in the requirement stage?
right, so when a developer goes in and approaches this defect and fixing a defect, they have to put, why this defect occurred, basically. And so they may look at the defect and say, oh, well, this is because we thought it was supposed to do this, right? Or we didn't quite understand that, or we made an assumption, right? Or he may go into the code and find out, oh, well, that's because we forgot this variable, or we declared that global and it shouldn't have been, or something like that, right? That would be a coding defect.
Right, and the chart, that similar chart where the percentage in requirements was a lot less, say that was 2%, and testing was 80%, it would mean that you're finding your defects later, which is costing you more money. So you want to find them early. So that's
true.
The chart isn't too bad. It's kind of good that you're
not
finding
all bad.
That soon.
It's not all bad, right?
Yeah.
Here I've pointed to requirements being big here, and so there's lots of reasons for that. And a lot of these metrics that we're presenting here are, I guess you could say, top-level metrics that if you find there's a problem, you want to dig deeper and find out other things. And there's many types of requirements entry defects. It could be because there's a change, didn't understand, and a lot of times, we get this. You go and talk to the requirements folks, the product management folks, and they say, oh, yeah, I meant this way, because they just didn't quite specify it enough. I'm sure you've run into that quite a bit.
Yeah, I think the fourth one there is probably the biggest one, where the requirement is just missing. They define the requirement, and it's at some level, but the level isn't detailed enough to actually create something.
Right.
Or they didn't think about a particular scenario that wasn't covered in the requirements. So those are, in my mind, those are pretty common things.
Right. Sandeep is asking, is that defect age? That is defect age, the previous one there. And we are, of course, going to be sharing this presentation. Um, let's see here. Keep going. So, Sabrina, I'll let you run the next poll since I'm not very good at that.
You need a training class, Phil.
Yeah, I need a training class. I wonder what kind of defect that would be called and where that would be classified. So
You know,
we're
if
trying
all
to
else
find
fails,
out.
blame it on your dad. I mean, come on.
Yeah, that's right. I just blame it on my dad. He didn't answer my questions. Yeah, that's a good one. So we're trying to find out what really, in terms of the benefits people have gotten from using Agile. And a lot of them seem to they talk about accelerated release of the product or market. I probably think that's the number one reason that people want to go Agile. And so to me, that means that there really is a focus on speed. The working software bit is probably one of the primary goals then of Agile.
How about to increase customer acceptance? Are the customers happier with what you're creating?
Yeah, that's another good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be quality basically, because quality from the end user point of view.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we go. We're getting close, and we are on to the number one metric. So here we go. Are you ready?
It's velocity, right?
Oh yeah. Well,
Oh, I
that was number
forgot. We
10.
did that one already. Okay.
Okay, yeah.
What's the number one?
The number one is working software delivery rate. You may ask what that is. First, let's get to the questions of this answers. The questions is that this answers is, am I getting feedback from the product owner? Am I going to meet schedule? And of course, am I delivering what I said I would? And let's take a deeper look at this. Basically, there's many variations of this, but basically we want to show software, right, that works. And so I'm sure you've seen it. You've been in delivery meetings where you're at the end of the sprint and you're giving the demo, and the guy that's giving the demo on that feature says, "Oh well, this doesn't quite work, but it's supposed to work like this. What do you think?" And that just doesn't cut it as far as getting feedback from the product owner. I'm sure you've seen this before, right, Doug? And so would you count that or not?
No, I never saw that in my code. No.
Oh, okay.
Never happened. It's always perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the point is that and the whole thing about Agile is developing working software. And, we find that having a good definition of done, where the done is actually showing something, there's just no way around that. And so here's an example here, and you can see that there's a problem here in terms of, what we had planned to show that worked and what actually worked. And so of course, we want to get better and keep these two lines as close together as possible. You can see we did a little better here. So the basic thing about the whole thing about Agile really that separates it from iterative development and separates it from prototyping as well as waterfall is working software. And I want to go back here actually and show working software does not mean perfect software. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be working to the point where the product owner or the customer can see it and say, "Oh, that's what I meant. Yeah, that's good. That's it. That's what I wanted." Or they say, "No, that's not what I wanted." And so if you don't have working software, then you can't do that.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest difference in my mind, between waterfall and agile, because waterfall, you took those requirements, you reviewed them, you signed off on them and said, okay, this is what we're going to deliver. Whereas agile, it's a fluid flow of really delivering what's really important.
Right. So I think this is the number one metric that's probably overlooked sometimes, and that is the focus on the working software. So let's kind of close up here and summarize. Basically, am I getting feedback? Basically, and that's really the key to Agile. That's what separates it, like I said, from all the other development methodologies. You can see I'm improving here. I'm getting pretty close to 100. I'd like to just kind of return to some principles of Agile. I think that a lot of times we focus on process. We want to do our stand-ups, we want to have face-to-face communication, we want to have our postmortems and so forth, and we hope that in doing so that we get the results that we want, and that is speed and quality. And I think a lot of us sometimes forget that we need to be certain people in order to have those things happen. And these kind of, you have to be agile people that are implementing an agile process in order to get agile results. And sometimes we forget about those things, and I think it's really important to think about: am I being flexible? Am I talking and participating in stand-up meetings, or am I just standing there like a bump on a log? Um, and I'm sure that you've seen this before, Doug, where you get people that are converting from a waterfall process to an agile process, and they're doing these things process-wise, but maybe they're not communicating.
Yeah, and that's where a Scrum coach really helps a lot, because the coach is familiar enough with those different types of personalities. And you're right, there's some personalities where you need to coach and work with them a little bit more to,
Right.
get them to open up more in that environment. Very true.
Right. So, here's some takeaways. I think that it's really important to really think about why we're doing things and use those whys to come up with questions, and then use the metrics to answer those questions, so that when we start off with, we know that we're not just opening a box of chocolates and wondering what we're going to get, nor at the end are we wondering, we stop and say, oh, gee, where am I? And I hope that all of you have learned a little bit today about how to get your metrics program going, and so that you don't end up at the end with a very long beard. And with that, I think we have a couple minutes for Q&A. And Sabrina, do you want to come on here and close it off?
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Phil and Doug. Everybody can post your questions on the panel on the right-hand side. Phil, there are quite a few questions there if you're able to answer any of them. Just to let you all know that we do regularly post updates on social network sites. So if you go to our Facebook page, XBOSoft, you'll see a lot of our updates, as well as on Google Plus and on LinkedIn. We also post very regularly on our blog. And we also have a lot of free white papers available for download at our Knowledge Centre on our website. But should you have any particular questions regarding your own requirements, then don't hesitate to email us, services@xbosoft.com. We're happy to chat and just share some of our knowledge, should that be all that you require. But other than that, just like to say thank you very much, everybody. And if we can't answer your questions today, then we'll email you them directly. Phil, over to you.
Okay, well, I think that's about it. I think that's all the questions. I think that there's numerous questions on if we're going to be sharing these slides or just the recording, and we are going to share the slides. And just as a note, I think we started off with about I started off with about 40 metrics, and it was really hard for me to narrow these down. And I hope that all of you guys that have been on have gotten what you wanted in what I consider to be the top 10. But if you want to talk about the other 30, please feel free to write. Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks, Doug.
Okay, you're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
And Sabrina, thanks for all the attendees, and we'll be talking to you soon. Thank you.